Well, welcome to the first session this morning. My name is Adrian Harewood from CBC News Ottawa at 5, 5:30 and 6. And it is an absolute delight for me to be here this morning. When I was invited to moderate this morning's session, I was kind of gobsmacked that they would even deign to ask me to come, because oftentimes speaking is a bit of an occupational hazard for me. I don't know if any of you watch CBC. You look like a CTV crowd. But yesterday on the news, and the problem with being an anchor, and I'm new to the job, but the problem with being an anchor is that every day you feel as if you're exposed. And so yesterday, on the 6 o'clock news, I said, Weedo Carleton Raceway. It's really Rideau Carleton Raceway. Hopefully I'll be able to enunciate this morning, and I'm certainly in the company of people who can certainly articulate themselves and enunciate. Just before we introduce the first panel, I studied political science, actually political theory and history at university, and I had a lot of wonderful teachers who taught me about Hobbes and Machiavelli and Wollstonecraft and Locke and the like. But my first political theory teacher was actually my mother. That's where I learned my first political lesson. There are 5 of us in our family. I'm the only boy. And one thing that my mother taught all of us from a very young age, when we were growing up here in Ottawa, was that we had a right to enter every single space in this society. And I think that that's something, a lesson that my mom certainly imparted in all of us, and it's something that I think my sisters in particular have taken to heart. So I think that I'm here in large part because of that first political theory lesson that I learned from my mother all those years ago. This morning's session, we're going to be examining through a multi-partisan, multi-sectoral lens and international lens how innovative and inclusive approaches in the private and public sector systems can result in the transformation of the political and economic landscapes for both women and men. We have 5 speakers, each of whom will be speaking for approximately 10 minutes. Following their presentations, we will then open the session to questions. So if you have any questions that you'd like to pose to our panelists or points that you'd like to make, you'll certainly have that opportunity. Our first speaker is Michael Chong. Michael Chong is the Member of Parliament representing the riding of Wellington Halton Hills. He was first elected in 2004. He served as the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and Minister for Sport. Michael Chong's private member's bill to elevate decorum is currently being reviewed by his colleagues in committee. In his past life, he was a co-founder of the Dominion Institute, now the Dominion Historic Institute. Please welcome Michael Chong.
Thanks, Adrian. It's a pleasure to meet you today. It's the first time I've met you. I feel like I've known you for many years because you're always on in my car and you're the friend in my head. It's amazing how talk radio becomes very intimate to you. You listen to it for hours, and these are people that you feel you know intimately. So I bet you there are a bunch of people in this room who feel that they know you on a very intimate basis, even though you've never met them before. I'm here today to participate in this discussion. I think it's a very important discussion. I think what Equal Voice is doing is incredibly important. And today I want to deliver a message to you that there are 2 significant gaps in Canadian politics. The first gap is one between Canadians and their democratic institutions, and the second is the fact that the House of Commons does not reflect the Canada of today. The first gap, that of between Canadians and their parliament, is evidenced in the fact that we had record low voter turnout in the last election. More than 4 out of 10 Canadians did not turn out to vote, the lowest voter turnout since Confederation. And that low level of voter turnout is forcing public debate into other fora, such as the courts, the internet, and civil society. And while these are all very important, They cannot represent the democratic will of the Canadian people. Only the 308 members of Parliament who are duly elected through our democratic institutions can do that. And if Parliament becomes increasingly disconnected from public policy debate, if it's not central to the debate about our national destiny, then that debate and that public policy will be determined in an increasingly non-democratic fashion. So that's why this gap is so much of a problem, and that's why we should be concerned about it. So what should we do about it? Well, I believe that we need to begin to reform Parliament. We need to begin to reform our democratic institutions to bring them closer and make them more relevant to Canadians. And I think a small but important first step, a very small first step, should begin with the reform of question period. The heart of the daily proceedings in the House of Commons is question period in the House of Commons. Each day, millions of Canadians either read or hear about or watch question period through the national media. And for many Canadians, it is their only window on Parliament. And for those Canadians, Parliament is question period. And what they see through that window on a daily basis is not something they are impressed with. If there's one thing that members of Parliament on both sides of the aisle have heard consistently throughout their time in office, is that Canadians disapprove of the way in which question period is conducted. And as a result, there is this growing divide between our democratic institutions, between Canadians who are becoming increasingly apolitical, and a Parliament that's becoming more and more partisan. And I've heard from many women, not all, but many women, that the atmosphere in politics dissuades them from seeking elected office. I've heard that from men as well, but I've also heard that disproportionately from women. So there is a proposal in front of the House Affairs and Procedures Committee, as Adrian has mentioned, that proposes 6 reforms to question period, one is which is to elevate the decorum and civility in the House during that 45-minute period each day. The committee is studying it. They have till April 6th of next month to consider these changes and report recommendations back to the House. And I hope that they accomplish that work and recommend substantive changes. And I want to thank Equal Voice for their support for this initiative. In October, they had a Respect the Rules Day where they came to question period to reinforce their message that they feel that this is an important part of the overall picture in encouraging more women to seek elected office. So that's the first gap, that between Canadians and their Parliament. The second gap, though, is the fact that the Canadian House of Commons does not reflect what this country is today. It's not representative of women. Only 1 in 5 parliamentarians, 1 in 5 members of the House are women, when their numbers are more than double that in the population. Only 1 in 5 only 1 in 10 members of the House are visible minorities, when their numbers in the general population are double that. So on many different levels, the House does not reflect what this country is today, and that is a big problem in terms of this second gap between our democratic institutions and the people they purport to represent. And that's why what you are doing here in this room is so very important. We need better democratic representation, and better representation means more women in the House of Commons and more visible minorities as well. Recently, I went to McMaster University and I talked to Dr. Philip Savage, who has set up the first data lab in Canada that's actually analyzing on an empirical basis what takes place in Parliament. And they have set up some sort of system where they have analyzed the amount of time that has been given to women and to men on the floor of the House during question period. And one of the shocking facts they've discovered about question period is that women have been given the floor to speak 7% of the time, while men are given the floor to speak 93% of the time. So clearly we have our work cut out for us. And Equal Voice is suggesting greater representation for women in Parliament, and I suggest that we collectively may also want to seek a greater voice for those women who are already elected to the chamber. I want to leave you with this thought. More than 4 to 10 Canadians in the last election refused to vote. Only 1 in 10 MPs are visible minorities. Only 1 in 5 MPs are women. These facts decrease the legitimacy of our democratic institutions. Canadians may not know the exact standing orders, statutes, unwritten conventions, party constitution bylaws that need to be changed, but they do know that something is wrong and it needs to be fixed. And my commitment to you as a member of Parliament is to be part of that change we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Brevity. Brevity. Yeah. Very concise. Thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is Françoise David. Françoise is a prominent Quebec activist who is the co-founder and head of Quebec Solidaire. Mademoiselle David has a long history within the women's movement with a major role in the International World March of Women and having served as president of the Fédération des Femmes du Québec. Please welcome Françoise David.
Bonjour.
Good morning, and thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. I know that a speech in French is going to require an extra effort on your part, but with interpretation, everything should be just fine. First of all, I'd like to say that in Quebec, depending on the year, there are about 30% of members of the National Assembly that are women, but that's far too few. And municipally, about 15% of mayors and town councillors are women, and that's really not enough. Now, obviously, in the time I have, I can't talk to you about the entire situation of women in Quebec. So, I will talk about one experience, and that is the experience of Quebec Solidaire. Quebec Solidaire is a provincial political party which has just reached its 5th anniversary. It was founded on February 5th, 2006 by merging two groups, a small left-wing political party which was called l'Union des Forces Progressistes and another political group which was called Option Citoyen, and which I had founded in 2004 along with other men and women. And it was the merger of these two groups which led to the foundation of Quebec Solidaire. Now, it's important here to point out that on the one side, on the side of l'Union des Forces Progressistes, there were two-thirds of the people there were men. It was the same thing with candidacies, because they did present candidates. They did have candidates run. And in Option Citoyen, two-thirds of members were women, and two-thirds of our coordination committee was made up of women. And most members came from feminist groups, etc., and many women from the regions of Quebec. And from the moment our party was formed, we agreed on two things, and this may be one of the keys to ensuring women's participation in politics. First of all, in the declaration we unanimously passed in our founding assembly, we defined ourselves clearly as a political party that was, of course, on the left, ecological, and feminist. This was extremely clear. It was in our Declaration of Principles, so everyone knows where we stand and what we want to do. Secondly, we voted party statutes, so all our internal rules, and among these statutes, it is understood that our leadership, which is a coordinating committee, is changed a bit since over the past 5 years, but right now it's 13 people who lead the party, and at least half must be women. So, as you can see, since there are 13 of us, we can't have fewer than 7 women. Are you following? So, in fact, women always constitute a majority because you can't have 6.5. Further, in our statutes, we have a political commission or committee. It's a kind of platform committee which works at designing our platform committee. And half of the people on this committee must be women. And all of them are elected at a conference, at a party conference, party congress. And we recommend that all our local associations maintain parity between men and women, and we will still be having a party congress, and our Women's Commission will recommend mandatory parity. It's not something that's there yet, but we'll see. Now, with respect to how this happens in practice, we had 2 general elections in 2007 and 2008, and both times we ran 52 candidates, and this was a first in Quebec. 52% of our candidates were women, and we ran people in almost every riding. Now, we knew full well that in many ridings we had absolutely no chance of winning, whether it was a man or a woman running, because Quebec Solidaire was a very young party, and we had to become better known. So it was perhaps easier for us to find women who knew that they were making a 33-day commitment, and that after that they could continue doing their day-to-day duties and jobs. But now I can talk to you about the various challenges we faced. Since the beginning, we have adopted feminist stances on all kinds of subjects, health, social services, education, family, labor, international relations, the right to abortion. So that's that, and there's no problem there. Now, how do things work? Now, the fact that women represent 52% of candidates, well, I think being a small party helped, but there's still something that's important that I say to you, and it has a lot to do with what Ms. Lawless was talking about. It's far easier to recruit men than women. And there's a classic case, and I am the president of the party, so I work at this every day. I'll get an email from a gentleman I don't know who says, Ms. David, I'm the man for you. I'm your candidate. That means candidate. Now, in 5 years, I have never had an email from a woman saying, I'm the woman for you. It takes a man half an hour to be convinced to run, but it takes at least 3-hour-long conversations to convince her to run. And it's for the same reasons as hold in the United States. They say, first of all, I'm not sure that I'm qualified. I'm not sure I have the credentials. And yet we look for women who have had an involvement, who have played a leadership role. So despite this problem, we have managed to run 52% of our candidates who are women. And we have positions filled by women, both in the national leadership and people working on our platform, but it was quite a job to get this done. It's very easy to have half the positions filled by men. And I'm not even talking about candidates here. I'm talking about internal leadership positions. It's extremely complicated. There's a lack of self-confidence, family responsibilities, and there are many women, especially those with families. Many don't want to leave for an entire weekend to go and sit on our leadership committee or to take part in a committee. And there are many women who, before they leave, they want to cook for the entire weekend. Here we are in 2011, but things are still that way. And after 5 years, these are still major challenges. Now there's going to be a Congress in 5 days, and we still have positions to fill for our coordination committee. And I have to find a woman, otherwise we will not be able to respect our parity rule. It's really, really hard, and it seems to me that we'll be working till the very last minute to do this. But I am convinced. I wasn't at the beginning, but now I am convinced that if we did not have mandatory parity in our statutes, we would have stopped looking for women a long time ago, because that's what happens in other parties. They look for women, and they do this more than they used to, and then they stop. But we have no choice. We must find women, and we do find women. But it takes us hours and hours, hours on the phone, etc. A second problem, even if I consider that we have adopted feminist positions, the feminist point of view and analysis hasn't been integrated everywhere. We're going to have a Congress in a few days, and it will have as its main subject the economy. All kinds of men are interested in the issue, but it's hard to get women interested, and yet they are the ones who experience economic problems in this country. They are the ones who have to deal with this on a daily basis. They have to deal with the choices the government has made on a daily basis, but they don't feel qualified to talk about the economy. And it's also very difficult to convince our male colleagues to make feminist analysis a part of their economic analysis. I'm not sure we've managed to do that, but we have made some progress. So if we're trying to find solutions to these various questions, well, as I said in the beginning, I think that the first thing we have to do is to have a feminist commitment on the part of the political party itself. And I think that in some parties this will be quite difficult, very frankly, but we have to try. We have to make sure that there is the will to have a feminist position, and this has to start this has to be from the top down. Secondly, even if it's written down, we need feminist leaders, we need feminist women, not only women, but we need feminist women who are committed and who will have as their constant concern that we do not get on the slippery slope. Without certain feminist leaders, I'm afraid that certain male colleagues forget about this very important issue. And thirdly, another part of the solution is to be found in what you do here at Equal Voice. We have the equivalent in Quebec. It's called Femmes et Démocratie, or Women and Democracy. And we have to make sure that older women help younger women who want to get involved in politics at whatever level, and no matter what the party. And this is extremely important. It's important that they share their experiences. And I also think it's important that there be more women who decide to go into politics, because once we change political behavior, so I was very interested in what my colleague had to say. But when we have the social policies that allow women to not have to deal with their family duties, we need child care, and we also need after-school care. Otherwise, how can women and how can men, as far as that's concerned, how can men and women take part in a social life? We also have to consider the labor market and its organization, because these people have to be available at any time, and this runs counter to family life and to a life of social commitment. So as far as I'm concerned, social policies and economic policies are equally important to allow women to run politically and to get involved politically.
Merci bien, Françoise. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you, Françoise.
Here is Deborah Gillis. Deborah is the Senior Vice President, Membership and Global Operations for Catalyst. Catalyst works globally with businesses and the professions to build inclusive workplaces and expand opportunities for women and business. Ms. Gillis was selected as a Woman Worth Watching in 2011 by Profiles in Diversity Journal. Please welcome Deborah Gillis.
Thank you very much. My role today is to share the perspective and the lessons from the corporate or business environment and what organizations around the world are doing to create workplaces where we can see women achieve. And I will share with you some research from Catalyst, what we know from working with those organizations. But I'll also draw on my own perspective, which is there is a great deal that both our political leaders, political institutions can learn from what's happened in the private sector. I say this not only as an executive at Catalyst, but someone who has worked for many years in government as a former chief of staff to a party leader and as a former candidate. In fact, I opened a speech about the issue of women's underrepresentation on corporate boards with a story from the campaign trail. I was out canvassing in the provincial election in Nova Scotia in 2003, knocked on a door, and a mother and her young daughter came to the door. I introduced myself, and the mother explained to the little girl that I was the candidate in the election and that she may have seen my signs. That little girl, who was probably 7 or 8 years old, looked up at me and she said, "I thought only boys did that." And she sort of stopped me in my tracks, but it was a really important reminder about role models. We heard this in the presentation this morning, and we reflect what we see. And for that little girl, her experience clearly was that she had not seen women in the role of political candidate or leader or elected representative. And so the story of that young girl in Cape Breton, while it may seem a long way from the issue of women's representation on corporate boards, is actually very relevant. So many have said this morning, and I'm sure this was discussed yesterday, that we marked International Women's Day this week. And clearly we've been talking about the role of women in government, in business, in society for a very long time. And what that's partly meant is that there are many people who think that the fact we've been talking about this for so long means that we've actually made progress, that the days of advocating for equality are long past us, that organizations like the one I lead are kind of old-fashioned and passé. So consider these headlines, in fact, from 2010 talking about the role of women. The Economist's first issue of the year declared, "We did it." The Globe and Mail ran a wonderful series, "Women Need to Lead." Newsweek described how women will rule the world. And Time announced, "Workplace salaries at last, women on top." And just Tuesday, writing in the Globe and Mail on International Women's Day, one columnist wrote that in the West, the war for women's rights is over and we won. So all is good, right? Back to the office, back to what we're doing? Not so fast. Yes, it's true, we have made significant progress in so many areas. But it's also true that women and men do not earn the same for doing similar work. In fact, recent studies suggest the gender pay gap is growing. And after decades in the workforce, women remain stalled in middle management roles. In fact, Catalyst's 2010 census of FP 500 senior officers released just last week reported the following. 17.7% of senior officer positions in the 500 largest companies in this country are held by women. 30% of all companies have 0 women senior officers, and 35% of public companies have no women senior officers. Consider that 474 of the 500 largest companies in this country are led by men. Most concerning is the fact that the numbers are changing so slowly. Less than 1 percentage point increase between 2008 and 2010, continuing a trend that we have seen for many years. The picture is the same when we look at corporate boards, where women hold 14% of board seats in Canada, and 45% of public companies have no women directors. It's clearly not the case that we can assume that women being in the labor force, being educated, will create a robust pipeline and that they will naturally rise to the top. In fact, in research that Catalyst did, looking at the graduates of the leading business schools around the world, we found that in their first job post-MBA, women earned $4,600 less than men, started at a lower level, and never caught up. And before you assume, as so many do, that this is women's choice because of families, these stats held regardless of family status. What's really clear is that change will not come as a demographic inevitability, but only as the result of careful, thoughtful, systemic intervention by organizations, industries, and their leaders. When Catalyst was founded almost 50 years ago, we had a model that was really about helping individual women, recognizing that there is an important role for every woman to play in managing their own careers, developing their skills, taking ownership for their career path. But it's also true that there are organizational barriers that no woman can change on her own. And so our model shifted very deliberately from fixing the women to fixing the organizations, from fixing women to fixing workplace culture. And it's here I think the legislation that we've heard about this morning is so important because it speaks very directly to the issue of changing cultures. The issue really then becomes one of ensuring how do we create real choice for women in their careers. On virtually every single interview that I did talking about the census numbers that I just shared with you, and this was true from coast to coast, I was asked this question. Isn't it true the reason that women aren't represented in the top leadership roles in Canada is because they choose not to? They opt out to raise their families. Every case, it went back to, well, isn't it because women don't want to be there? And that misses the critical point about the importance of the cultural change that needs to happen in organizations, recognizing that cultures, systems, processes, and the very model of what we think of as a leader was designed for workplaces and a world that is completely different from what it looks like today. So what are some of those barriers that we see in a corporate environment that I think resonate and have relevance when we think about women in politics? The first is stereotypes. Women know that women are penalized for behaving in ways that men are rewarded for. They are either too tough, too soft, but never just right. It's kind of a Goldilocks syndrome we have going on. In our research, we call it the double-bind dilemma for women in leadership. Damned if you do, doomed if you don't. Think about Hillary Clinton's and how she was treated during the U.S. Democratic primary. And in fact, Catalyst research was cited for this very point. Certainly the old double standard is persistent. Again, we heard this morning in the presentation. Charlotte Whitton's famous quote, "Whatever women do, they must do twice as much to be thought of as half as good," remains as true today as it was when she said it so many years ago. And in fact, when we talk to women about their experience in the workplace, consistently they describe the need to outperform, to be credible. And again, we heard that from Jennifer when she talked about the fact she would cite all these statistics to prove that she was smart and capable. And of course, the problem with stereotypes is what we call the cascading bias. They're perpetuated because leadership traits and behaviors are modeled on current leaders. And if most of the leaders we see are men and it's a male picture that we have in mind, likes like, and we continue to perpetuate that model. And so again, if that little girl that I met on the campaign trail only ever saw a man in a role, that's what she expects to see. And when leaders are choosing leaders, if the mindset they have is think leader, think male, then again, that's what they're looking for. Finally, I'd like to mention Catalyst research on sponsorship and mentorship. And here it's really important to understand that women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. We need to have active sponsors, those individuals who will put their credibility on the line to promote and put our names forward. And this, again, continues to be very relevant in the political world. Finally, work-life effectiveness. The most progressive organizations understand that what's important is not where work happens and when it happens, it's what the outcomes are. Forge and create new career paths that allow for greater flexibility in the workplace. In the corporate environment, some key solutions. Leadership commitment, number one, starts at the top, is absolutely critical. Second, accountability for results. Hold your team, your leadership accountable for making change happen. It's critical to set goals, as we heard just a moment ago, and to monitor progress. Women need to be exposed to networks where they have an opportunity to build and forge relationships. Connect women to mentors and sponsors. Think about reciprocal mentoring programs where women and men mentor each other. That relationship is critical to ensuring that men become champions of diversity in their organizations. Support work-life flexibility, as I mentioned. And the last piece of advice that we're increasingly talking to organizations about is invite men into the conversation. Take the no boys sign allowed off the door. Men hold the majority of leadership decisions and positions. They must be part of the solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Thank you. Our next speaker is Her Excellency Mohau Pheko. She is the current High Commissioner for the Republic of South Africa. She has had a remarkable and varied career prior to joining the Foreign Service. This is her first diplomatic assignment. She holds a master's in public health from the New York Medical College and speaks only 5 languages. In addition to that, she also owns Afro Boho Chic, a recycled designer clothing company, as you can tell by her attire this morning. Please welcome Her Excellency Mohau Pheko.
Good morning, and thank you very much to Equal Voices, I think, for this wonderful opportunity to engage one another. I think these spaces are so important for us because they give us the opportunity to refine, to expose the issues, to take action, and to win for women. But also on this 100 years when we have struggled as women, it's certainly time for us to celebrate ourselves and, of course, spend the next 100 years plotting, conspiring to make sure that women get it to the top. I want to begin by bragging just a little bit, just a little bit, if you'll allow me. In 1994, when South Africa went to its first election, we were ranked 141st in the world in terms of women's percentage in the legislature. By 2004, we had raised that number to 32% of women. By 2010, we are among the 11 countries at the top. Thank you. We are at number 3 at 45% and inching towards our 50% mark. Now, how did we do it? And I think that this is important for me to express how we did it, what were some of the challenges that we faced. First, we marched, we pleaded, we lobbied, we protested, we explained until we couldn't explain anymore. We gate crashed the rooms where men were busy engaging around policy issues while we smelt the appetizers from the outside, pleading just to come in and say a few words. To coming into the rooms. And I think it was very significant how we entered the room. We were very lucky because prior to the 1994 elections, we had the opportunity to formulate a democratic constitution for our country. From the very outset, we were very clear that we were not going to be left behind in this constitution. And so we plotted. We brought together over 151 women's organizations across race, across religion, across everything you can imagine. And it was quite a hodgepodge which I had to manage at the Women's National Coalition. A very unruly, very cantankerous, a very unpleasant experience at times with women wanting all sorts of things. But eventually we came up with 12 key issues that we could agree upon. Of course, some with reservations, which was fine. But we said, even with your reservations, put your reservations down, but at least support the Women's Charter for Effective Equality. And so with that charter, we entered the political party space because these were the men who were negotiating the democratic space for South Africa. And we went into those spaces and we said to each political party, if you don't put women in the spaces of power, we will ensure that we do not vote for you. If you don't support the Women's Charter for Effective Equality, we will ensure that women do not vote for you. Now, we needed a very strong women's movement from the outside, and that was a very, very critical ingredient to this. And our first demand was 30% women across political parties, in all spaces, in the leadership, in all the spheres of governance. We had women on the inside so that we had this inside and outside strategy, and we turned the oven on to make sure that it was hot enough so that the women on the inside would not become comfortable and think that since they had reached and leave us outside, we constantly reminded them that, hey, we're still out here and we've sent you in there to do a job. So that was very important because they took our message, they took our agenda. And I like what my sister from Catalyst was saying. We also engaged the men. We said, we were with you in the liberation struggle. We were with you in the trenches. Remember me? I was the one who was right next to you. I can hold a position of power in my political party. And we started getting men also to be champions for the Women's Charter as well. It was very important that we bring grassroots women along with women who had the intellectual capacity. So we brought the research and the statistics evidence to win our battle, to begin to show where women are, what the status of women was in our country, and continually reminded people that we were 52% of the majority in our country, and therefore actually 30% was a discount, and we need 52%. And so we used all sorts of strategies. We did show and tells. We named and shamed people who did not comply with the Women's Charter. We also lifted the ante when it came to local government elections, because we realized that this was the space that could serve as a training ground for women who were entering the political space for the first time. And so we ran around and we said, vote for another woman. And we told the men, vote for your mother, vote for your sister, in order to increase our numbers at the local government election space. And I must say we had a lot of problems there, mostly with women. And I want to have a little conversation with ourselves as women, because in our quest for power, in our quest to transform the spaces, in our majority as women, we often do not vote for other women. And this is something that we ought to converse about. And this is a global phenomenon. It's not just a phenomenon in Africa alone. It's a phenomenon all over the world. And we have to transform that space so that everywhere where women stand up as candidates, we support women. We were also aware that at the local government, many said that, but what do women know? But this woman doesn't know anything. She's illiterate. She doesn't know anything about the economy. We said, that's okay. We'll dress her up nicely and we'll put her in there. As long as she can open her mouth, that's fine. We'll do the reading for her and tell her what is being said in the documents. But as long as she can open her mouth and say what she needs to say, that's what we want. And so these were some of the struggles, because many women entering the spaces were illiterate. They couldn't read, they couldn't write. But the one thing they knew the issues. And as long as we could inform them of what these issues were, they were bold, they were brave, and they were able to open their mouths and speak out. So in essence, we did not leave women out simply because they were not educated enough to enter the space. So we took them along with us. We also told women that you need to bring your spirituality with you, because we need harmony. In order for us to create this unity amongst ourselves, we need you to bring your harmony with us, because often we are told as we enter these spaces that, you need to leave those sorts of things behind, because, those things don't work in the political spaces. But we told women, bring every weapon that works for you and use it in the political space, because it'll work for you. Define the space for yourself. Now, by 2004, we began to realize that in the cabinet, a lot of women who were ministers were actually deputy ministers. And so we said, we're tired of these bridesmaids. We want to be the groom. So with every cabinet reshuffle, we went on the offensive in the media. And we said, the next position that opens up for minister, we want a woman in that position. We started saying that we don't want women in these so-called soft ministerial positions. We wanted them in trade. We wanted them in minerals, in defense. And I'm very proud to say that this year, as we speak, we have a woman minister of trade, minerals. Our defense minister is a woman. Our intelligence minister is a woman. Water, energy, all the strategic areas. So it became very important for us to recognize that we needed to enter the space and increase our institutional power. And that meant really bringing in quantity. And so we started fighting for the 50%. Remember, we started with that measly 30% discount. Now we're at 50%. And we started pushing for that. When the proportional representation list came up, we said, not only do we want 50% on the list, we don't want the 50% at the bottom of the list, we want 50% at the top of the list. And these are the things that we struggle with and we're constantly challenging about. But it was also very important that we have an intergenerational strategy, that as women who had entered the field first and were older women, as they moved out of the system, we ensured that young women were also moving into the system. Because, you know, young women bring a whole different sense of power, a whole different confidence into the system, and have a different worldview on a lot of things. And it was important for them to come into the system. And these are some of the things that we have been working on. But it's also important for me to share with you that there has been backlash. In the sense that when we try to put up a woman as a candidate for president, it was very difficult. Very, very difficult. And the men would say, a woman for president? No, you've got to be kidding me. You guys want 50% and now you want a woman for president. They said, no, it will never happen. But we are certain that on the African continent, we are the next country that will have a woman president in that seat. And we're fighting for it across that. It needs a lot of courage. It needs a lot of boldness. It needs a lot of fire. And I know that we are going to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you. Our next speaker is Diane Kelly. Diane is the Grand Chief of the Grand Council Treaty Number 3 Nation. She is the first woman Grand Chief and first woman lawyer of the Anishinaabe Nation from Kenora, Ontario. Please welcome Diane Kelly.
Good morning. Ogima B'nai Sikh Indijnikas, Piju Dotem, Onigaming Duji. I wanted to thank the conference organizers for inviting me here this morning. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm very pleased and humbled to be sitting amongst so many esteemed colleagues, both up at the panel and here in the room. One of the things I wanted to explain is when we start off speaking as Anishinaabe people, we're always told to provide our Anishinaabe name, and that's why I introduced myself, Ogima B'nai Sikh. We always identify which clan we're a member of, and that's Piju, that's the Lynx clan, and also where we're from. In our communities and in our nation, it's so important to establish relationships, create relationships, and nurture those relationships. So I just wanted to put that out, that's something that we always do as Anishinaabe people. As I was introduced, I am the first Grand Chief who's a woman of Grand Council Treaty 3. I want to give you a little bit of background in terms of the Grand Council. The Grand Council is the historic government of Treaty 3. Treaty 3 is a treaty that we signed with the Crown Government that is 55,000 square miles in northwestern Ontario and southeastern Manitoba, right along the American and Canadian border. So we've had jurisdiction over that territory from time immemorial. And it's extremely important that we continue as the Grand Council. As I said, that's the traditional government of the Anishinaabe people. So one of the things we did to assert our jurisdiction is we entered into a treaty. I don't want to get into too much of a legal or a law overview of the state of the nation there, but I think it's really important to provide that background. The Grand Council has historically, at least in my lifetime and probably since the signing of the treaty, it's always been led by male leadership. And it was extremely interesting when I ran that I was selected, and I say selected because it is not an elected position. How the Grand Chief is selected, it's through a process of the chiefs and the councillors of our 28 First Nations. They come together. It's a traditional process which is led by our elders. And through that process, we have different individuals that are nominated. So as you're nominated, you're provided tobacco, and you either accept the tobacco and, of course, the nomination, or you decline. So when I ran, there was 5 of us, and we stood around the drum, and as the drum plays, the chiefs and councillors come in and they stand behind the person that they choose to have as the Grand Chief. So the person with the least amount of councillors and chiefs behind them is out, and those people then in turn stand behind their next nomination. So at the end of the day, it's the last person standing, or traditionally I suppose it's been the last man standing, that becomes the Grand Chief. So that's why I say it's a selected position. It's a 4-year term, but it's also very important because it's spiritually based. Traditionally and historically, the Anishinaabe Nation has been the Medewan people, and so the Grand Council has been very strongly rooted in that. And so I think it's also very interesting that in the 21st century that we still have those roots. So in that traditional selection process for Grand Chiefs that I talked about, we also have those hereditary lines, I suppose you could argue as well. I come from a long line of hereditary chiefs. My father, his grandfather, my grandmother played a role there, and so on and so forth, the generations prior to that. But going back to the Grand Council and the selection process, it's very interesting because I've always heard that in order for Anishinaabe people to survive, we've always had to adapt over the ages, and whether it be to disease, or whether it be to the lack of game, or whether it be to defending our territory, we've always had to adapt over the years. And so it's interesting that today in the 21st century, we now have a first woman Grand Chief. But the other really interesting thing, I think, is that I'm also a lawyer. So we come from chiefs that have been really traditionally grounded, or Grand Chiefs that have been traditionally grounded in our spiritual ways, but now we've added that element of education. And it struck me when one of the previous speakers spoke about you work twice as hard and you're half as good. And so I've felt that so many times, whether it be in my law school experience as an Aboriginal woman, but now again today I'm feeling that same type of feeling as a female leader. So I don't know if that means I work 4 times as hard and I'm a quarter as good, or But I can tell you, I'm up till past midnight working, and I'm up early in the morning. It never ends, but it's something I just really, truly enjoy. But anyways, getting back to the Grand Council and the Anishinaabe Nation governance system. So at the time of the negotiating of the treaties, in Treaty 3, it took 4 years before our elders and our leadership agreed to the terms of the treaty. But one of the things that one of the leaders said at that time, and it was Chief Sagachaway, he talked about education, and our elders and our leaders at the time were guided by ceremony, and they knew that change was coming, and they knew that we had to adapt, but they didn't want to lose who we were either. We wanted to maintain that foundation. So Chief Sagachaway, what he said was, give to me one of your sons and daughters, and I'll teach them about being Anishinaabe. I'll teach them how to live off of the land and how to live within our communities and understand our ways. And I'll give to you one of my sons and one of my daughters so that they can understand the cunning of the white man. Because they knew even back in the late 1800s that the times were changing and that we had to adapt and that we had to also maintain who we were. And so it was because of that statement that it was the leaders and the elders of the day agreed to the terms of the treaty. I mean, you don't see that when you look at the written document in the Queen's printer, but if you ever have a chance to look at some of the oral promises and the negotiations that resulted in the treaty, you'll see that it's somewhat a little bit different. So I'm always so proud of what Chief Sagachaway said, and it was when he said those words that it was our people agreed to enter into the treaty, and that's why today we say that Treaty 3 has one of the strongest education clauses of any treaty in Canada. But to me, again, coming to this point where, you know, as a nation, we're almost at the point where we're at a crossroads. You know, we could forget about being Anishinaabe. We could forget our spiritual roots. We could forget all the words of our elders. And we could really adapt. You know, we could become true, I suppose, Indian Act bands. We could become truly assimilated. But to me, the way I was raised by our elders and my family, I was always told how important it was to be Anishinaabe. And so I feel the pressure of being at that crossroad and not wanting to go this way, but to meld the two. And we cannot forget who we are as Anishinaabe people. So I think it's really important. It's a really important time for women. It's a really important time for Indigenous people. And again, I'm really honored to be here. I'm so proud to be living the vision of our Chief Sagachaway. Miigwech.
Well, thank you very much, Diane. We have a few minutes for questions. Unfortunately, it's going to be a bit of a truncated session because I understand we have to end at 11:30 or close to 11:30. So if you can make your questions as precise as possible, thank you, or comments. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Hi again, it's Sandra Agbinode from Women in Health at McGill. Thank you so much for your presentations and doing things differently. And I'm so grateful that we've had all of these international perspectives. We heard from Norway yesterday, the US today, and now Africa, which is a part that I'm so passionate about. So Her Excellency mentioned the importance of not leaving other women outside and turning the heat up for those inside. And so it's interesting that that comment is so powerful because in the African case, we have so many examples of countries where women still represent less than 0.05% of the National Assembly and the Senate. A good case in point is in countries like Nigeria, seen as the giant of Africa, that other African countries are supposed to be learning from. And I'm just wondering what Her Excellency would, what you would advise in terms of, or some recommendations for such countries to follow in the footsteps of Rwanda and South Africa, so we can get all women running. I mean, this is such an important issue, and yeah, I'm so glad that we got a chance to bring in an international African perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to answer? It's not working. You come up. You can come up then.
Hello. Oh, there it is. Okay. Thank you very much for that question. I think that each country is very different. What's very important is political will. Political will is extremely important, but it's also important to understand that the space of patriarchy is not an easy one to dislodge, and you need a very strong women's movement to ensure that that happens. So my advice is a strong women's movement, push for political will in this regard, and ensure that the legal framework is also correct, and fight for that.
Thank you. So, ma'am, back here.
Okay. Mine is more of a comment as well. One thing I noticed in Her Excellency's presentation was how specific your goals and targets were, because I think often we tend to talk about we need more women. in Parliament. We need men to take on more at home. We need, the world to change in some sort of very vague way. And you had such specific targets. There's a couple I've noted. First of all, the 50% goal, the next minister should be a woman, what's another one I put? We want them on the 50 on the top of the list. You were so very specific. I think that's a powerful strategy. And the other things that you bookended that specificity with, one is that charter. I think that so often people think, why do we need a Charter of Rights? It's just words. Words are so powerful. And then you have a document. You have the common language. And once you get the language that everybody can use, and you can have a dialogue, you can have that conversation. We've heard people say during this conference, we need to have a conversation. But you need to have those common words. The third thing was your accountability. So you had the words, you had the specifics, you had the common language, and then you used the media to hold people accountable. You asked women who were in power to remain accountable. You asked men to be accountable by reminding them of the role of women in liberation. So I congratulate you as a representative of your country. And I also thank the organizers of this conference, because I think one of the most fascinating things about this conference has been hearing the international stories, how they've defined the issues, how they've approached it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just in the interest of time, thank you for that comment. In the interest of time, we're going to try and parcel a few of the comments and questions together and then get our panelists to respond. Please go ahead.
Again, thank you all. Really wonderful thoughts and words that we can live on. So my first comment is to the Honourable Michael Chong, and this is for you to bring back with you. In terms of reform in question period, politeness doesn't need to be legislated, it needs to be practiced. I agree with you that there needs to be more women. In fact, I believe it would be 140 more women so that we have gender balance. In concert with these numbers, I think we need women that are in Parliament that are going to speak up on women's issues, both in their party, to make it an issue within their party, and then speak up in the House on behalf of women. I'd like to thank Deborah Gillis for your comments on the pay gap growing again, and it is. And in fact, as my sister Patty Ducharme said yesterday, we have a 27-year battle that continues with our members and the government on pay equity. And if that type of battle continues for 27 years, obviously there's a prevailing attitude, despite the fact that there was a very powerful woman as the CEO at Canada Post for several years. It wasn't fixed. And now it continues to grow. It's time to fix it. So I think we have to make change happen. I think if men aren't supporting women, then we don't vote for them, we run against them. Thank you.
Thank you. Back here, ma'am, please go ahead.
Today we heard from Michael Chong what he called his small proposal to influence deportment in the House of Commons. We know that in order to change deportment and decision-making in the House of Commons, we need to reach that critical mass. We've heard about that most of the weekend. We've also heard through this panel about most of the constructs that we talked briefly about yesterday that are required to influence critical mass in those countries like South Africa that have been successful around the world. Constitutional change, the type of electoral system that we have, quotas, and as a sidebar, they have legislative quotas for corporate boards in Germany, for example, just as as that example, and the last area being campaign financing, which we heard as a solution from Jennifer Lawless this morning. We have none of these in Canada. There is a proposal, Michael, a private member's bill in the House right now, sponsored by Marlene Jennings, which looks to incentivize that by providing an increased subsidy on a sliding scale of the per vote subsidy to parties when they elect more women, not when they nominate more women, when they elect more women. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on those types of legislated interventions.
Okay, thank you. I think that there was... Yeah. This person is next, I think. She's next. I'm sorry. I just had to leave the room. Okay.
Hi. Thank you for a wonderful panel. It was very specific, great solutions. I've cleared this with Nancy Peckford, and there doesn't seem to be another opportunity in the program. There's so many amazing women in this room, but I really want to take this opportunity to single out one woman, Flora Terra, who's here with us today. Flora, as you may know, ran in the 2007 parliamentary elections in Kenya, and she was abducted and tortured and left for dead on her father's grave. Her son was murdered, and today marks the 3rd anniversary of his death. So these are some of the obstacles that women face in other countries for daring to run. And I just wanted to ask for a moment of silence in honor of Flora's son. I'd also encourage you, because she's going back to Kenya next year to run in the 2012 elections. She's here in Canada with us for this year, and she's a gift. And we're raising money for her campaign. And one of the ways we're doing that is selling her books. She'd love to give them away for free, but we won't let her do that. Suggest a donation of $20 outside this room. This will be a direct, real way of supporting Flora when she returns to Kenya to run and win a seat in Parliament. And I don't know, Flora, I'm sorry if you just wanted to say a few words or...
Thank you so much. Today is a very difficult day for me. I remember my only son. But I would say his death was not in vain. I'm going to go back and resurrect his spirit. I lost all I had, but my hope is that we shall one day create a global sisterhood, because my case is not just the isolated case. It's not an isolated case. There are many people that go through this. I only have a platform to speak. There are other women out there who can be where I am to tell you what's happening. But this is true. I'm a living example. I've lost it. I've lost my son, but they left me with something that truly no one can take away from me. And that's my spirit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow. My name is Megan Harris, and first of all, I'm going to just prelude what I was going to say, just to reflect what just happened here. In each of our lives here, we all have reasons why we say we can't run today or it's someone else should do it. And I think after hearing that story of Flora and her child and the fact that what happened to her, and she is still so driven and committed to return to to her country as opposed to staying here and trying once again to advance and to improve it. I think for all of us here today, really, if you're thinking about running for office that you think there is no good time, will never be a good time. It's just your drive and your commitment to contribute and to make your country stronger in your community and ensure that our voices are heard. So that's just as a result of what happened. But my initial reason for standing here today is, and I'm shaking because of that, Michael and I had breakfast this morning, and I ran in 2004. I didn't win, but Michael did, thank goodness. And when he told me the statistics from McMaster University regarding the 7% of the time in which women speak, it was shocking then, and it was shocking to hear it again. But I guess, Michael, two things really. Your day as an MP, I think about an hour of your day really takes place in question period. And I think if, as women in this room or women not in this room, the idea that you don't like politics because you don't like what you see, that little soundbite on television, I think it would be, from your perspective, number one, how could women who are in the House, how can they improve the chances that they increase their time in question period, number one? And number two, could you just talk a little bit more about the other things that compose the I'd say over 95% of your day as an MP that makes it important for women to stand up and put their names on the ballot?
Okay. We're going to get Michael to respond. I hope he paid for breakfast. They have an expense account. I hope he did pay. But we will get Michael to respond. I'm just going to ask, there's someone back here. We have two more questions, and I think we'll be able to finish here. And we'll get our panelists to respond.
Hi, my name's Caitlin, and I'm from Central First Nation, Alberta, with IAW, and I'm part of the Square Independent Pheko. But my question is directly for Chief Kelly. As Grand Chief, would you ever run into Parliament, and why or why not?
Okay. That's great. Thank you very much. We will get Chief Kelly to respond to that. Did you have another question, or was that it?
And could you give me a couple tips? Sorry.
Okay. And tips on how to run as well. Okay. Thank you. Right here.
Hi, my name is Nefertari Holloway. I'm also from I'm in the Esqueo Independent, but I'm from Morley, Alberta. And my question is also to Chief Kelly. If we were not happy with the leaders in our community, who can we go to? And also, do the constitutional rules apply on reserve? Those were like my main concerns and questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And this is the last question and comment.
Hi, I'm directing my question as well to the Grand Chief. One of the questions we want to know is, how do you get First Nations, Inuit, and Métis concerns and issues to the forefront in national politics within Canada? We have issues such as the missing Aboriginal women in Canada. And what challenges do you face as the Grand Chief in addressing these issues? Sorry, I've been sent up here with these questions.
Okay, okay, great. Okay, well, is that it?
That is it, yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you. So I think we'll get Michael Chong first to respond to that question about what your day looks like, a typical day for you as an MP.
Yeah, question period is only 45 minutes of a 8-9 hour day on the Hill. And so certainly there are many other aspects to the Hill. There's committee work, there's duty day, which consist of debates and other procedures that take place in the House. So there's many other aspects to the day, and I agree that question period is only 1/10 of the daily proceedings in the House and its committees. Nevertheless, it is the place through which most Canadians perceive and see their parliament. And this is not an issue specific to women. It's also an issue that men complain about. The Canadians in general are not happy with the behavior and the civility and question period. And I agree with an earlier remark that you can't legislate that, but I think the format and the rules drive the behavior. And in the same way that if you're a mere spectator in an arena, in any arena in Canada, you're going to behave in a certain manner. You're going to jeer and cheer against the opposition and for your team. In a similar way, because we have disempowered members of Parliament, we have taken away their right to pose questions in the House. For the large part, most members of Parliament are mere spectators in their own question period. They no longer have the right to ask questions of the government. That right was taken away some 30 years ago. And as such, not being true participants but being mere spectators, they behave as such and they participate in all the cacophony that takes place in question period. So I do think that while it's a small part of the day, it's a very public part of the day, and that while we can't legislate behavior, the rules and format drive that behavior, and we need to focus on changing the rules and format for those reasons.
Very, very quick question. Was there ever a moment in Canadian history when things were more civil in the House of Commons?
I'm not sure if that's the case. Ned Franks at Queen's University, Professor Emeritus there, has said that there was never a golden age of Canadian Parliament in terms of its operations in his research. I think the difference between today and 50 years ago is that what was once filtered through a very compliant and cozy national media is now delivered directly live through electronic media and digital media in the age in which we live. Through the internet, through television, and through various media, people now see directly which was once unseen and filtered. And I think what they see is not what they like, and I think we've got to adjust to that new reality.
Okay, thank you. Chief Kelly, there were a series of questions that were posed to you, one of which is, are you considering running?
Thank you for the questions. Well, if the question was, would I consider running as an MP, and I absolutely would. I absolutely would consider that. I don't know that, it depends if the opportunity were right and the circumstances in the community at the time, but I absolutely would consider that. Also, I was asked about tips and challenges. With regard to my position as Grand Chief, we have 28 First Nations that I work with, so there's 28 chiefs. Only 6 of those are women. On our chiefs and councils, most but not all of those councils do have females represented on those councils. I think in terms of tips and challenges, it's really about understanding who we are as in my case, Anishinaabe people, and following that. I know there's always challenges in terms of being challenged and dissension and criticism, and every political process has its way, but I think, when you really believe in what you do and you follow, in our case, the wisdom of the elders, it makes it that much easier. And so again, as an Indigenous person, I would encourage you to, and this kind of feeds into that other question around what if you're not happy with your chief and council, you really need to, I would suggest, talk to your elders. The elders, despite not being an elected or selected position, they really do, at least in our communities in Treaty 3, have a very strong influence over the political matters and the business of the community. But again, if you don't have a lot of elders in your communities, certainly go to the band meetings, certainly ask your chief, ask your council members, ask your band manager what's going on, ask for the information, and sometimes it's a lack of communication. There's so many things that chiefs and councils and First Nation political people have to be responsible for. You also asked about the Constitution. The most important part of the Constitution for Aboriginal people is Section 35, and Section 35 really puts a number of hoops there for the federal and provincial the federal and provincial governments, and how they treat Aboriginal people and their rights. And so I think it's I suppose it's a double-edged sword in some ways, depending on how you look at it. But I think, again, it depends on the situation, whether it's a good or bad thing. How can we get issues addressed? I mean, it's the same as any other rights group or interest group. You have to lobby the issue. You have to use media. You have to partner sometimes and partner with people or organizations that you wouldn't necessarily think would be the logical place to partner. But I mean, that's really what it is. It's about getting the message out there, trying to get the public support in terms of whatever the issue may be, whether it be murdered and missing Aboriginal women, whether it be the poverty, whether it be the child welfare, residential school legacy, on and on and on. So that's really what I would suggest in that regard.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask for just final words from Françoise David and also Deborah Gillis. So if you have anything that you'd like to state. Yeah.
Oui. La seule chose que...
The only thing that I would perhaps like to add to what has already been said, it is that we'll also have to change the voting methods so that women could more easily have access to high political positions. In Quebec and Canada, the same thing applies. We have a voting method that has been inherited from Great Britain, and there's no runoffs, there's no proportional elections, and we therefore elect 1 or 2 MPs per riding. And a political party could come in second with a number of votes in Canada and have no MPs elected at all. But if we had a proportional vote, where we would keep a certain number of ridings, but we'd also have a list, each political party would present a list of candidates. The people will go to vote. They vote all on the same day at the same time for their riding MP, but they also vote a second time for a political party of their choice. And if the result is that it's compulsory for all political parties to alternate between a man and a woman, for instance, in the first 10 names of the party list, there are good chances of improving the number of women participating in elections. In every country where there is a proportional vote, and of course where there is an obligation to alternate between men and women, this helps to promote women's representation. So this is a second issue that should interest us. Thank you.
So only one quick comment that I would offer. Until women reach leadership roles and roles of influence in business and politics in this country, we will continue to be marginalized in every other area. Let's follow the example from the inspirational story we heard from Africa. This is a fight we must continue to fight. So I encourage everyone in the room to continue the good work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on that note, thank you. That brings us to the end of this session. I'd like to thank our very fine panelists. I'd like to thank the Honourable Michael Chong, Françoise David, Deborah Gillis, Chief Diane Kelly, and Her Excellency Mohau Pheko. Thank you very much.